Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for having us today. A few months ago, did this panel. We hosted the Midway Chamber of Commerce at St. Paul College, and we did this panel. And that was somehow how we earned an invite to come to your Chamber of Commerce meeting today. So thank you for having us. So AI is changing the way we learn, work, and connect. And so today we're going to hear from higher education about how AI is showing up in classrooms, in the workplace, and in the community, and what it could mean for your organization. So it's something that part of our role at St. Paul College is preparing students for the workforce. So as you're hopefully looking to hire our graduates, if you don't know anything about us, touch base with me afterwards and we'll chat. As you're looking to hire our graduates, we understand that AI skills, use of AI, understanding how it might be used is something that is emerging in the workforce. And so we need to make sure that not only are we upskilling ourselves as professionals, as faculty, as leaders at St. Paul College, but how are we adjusting, modifying our curriculum to ensure that we are training students to be prepared for the influence that AI has on their individual career area and industry. So with that, I'm going to do a quick poll by hand. And so I'm going to ask a question, and your options are not at all, sort of, and yes, all the time. So the question is, to what extent is your organization currently using generative AI tools? So if you say not at all, raise your hand. Okay. What about somewhat? We're dabbling, we're experimenting with it. Okay. And then what about a lot? I'm using AI every day for our work. Okay. So then the second question is more on a personal level. To what extent are you currently using generative AI tools? Not at all.
Are you asking how we're using it?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, to what extent you are currently using generative AI tools, like personally. So not at all? Is anyone like, I don't even know how to use ChatGPT? Okay. What about somewhat? Mm-hmm. And what about extensively? I use it all the time. All right. All right, thanks. That just gives us a sense of where folks are at in the room. So with that, I'm going to turn to our panelists, and I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourself and just touch on what your relationship is to AI. How does it show up in your work, and how do you use it or not, and why?
Hi, everybody. I'm Mindy. I've been teaching at St. Paul College for 18 years. So AI is a shift for me, thinking about how I teach and what it means for my students. But as a business department, so I teach in the business department, we have programs in accounting and marketing and human resources and also a transfer pathway. We have really had to spend a lot of time rethinking our curriculum and what are the skills that students are going to need when they graduate. So I think that's how it shows up for the most part, is thinking about in our coursework what we need to do to train students to use AI, but also to think about it ethically, and what are the other skills that are really going to be good to complement the shifts we're seeing in technology. On a personal level, I do use it also. So sometimes I'll design, for example, a discussion board question, and then I'll go to AI and say, how can I change this question so that AI can't answer it and my students really need to be the ones answering it? So very briefly, that's kind of what I'm doing.
Thank you.
My name is Sonia, and I have been at St. Paul College for 2 years, and I was at Anoka Ramsey Anoka Tech for 5.5 years before that. And before that, I was at a K-12 institution or a district for about 10 years, and before that in higher ed for about 10 years. So I've been in academia for quite some time. I have taught and I have managed technology in all different forms. Currently at St. Paul College, I manage the IT group, and so I oversee both the service desk, the data center, data services, IR, and the network team. So I get to see all of it. And when I was teaching, I always thought, while I was teaching technology, I always looked at literacy skills as part of my role. And so as I was using AI, it was like, how do I use AI as a literacy tool? But then using AI now, it's kind of embedded, right? When we look at web searches. Right now, if you go to Google and do a Google search, Google, right, you get the Google answer, and it's an AI answer. So I use it all the time, whether I whether it's intentional or not, because it's just one of the tools that we have. We also use AI because whether it's in a software package or now even in a hardware with the software package embedded, it's in everything that we do. When students are coming to the service desk especially, they're asking us, how do we use AI or how do we not use AI? So that's just something that we're always seeing. But I also see that AI is the next generation of a tool that we just have to get used to using. And I will also say too, I'm a huge Marvel fan, and what Uncle Ben said was, with great power comes great responsibility. And so the next piece that we have to look at is, how do we use it in an ethical manner?
All right, I don't know how to follow all that up, but hi everybody, I'm Claire. And I too have been in higher ed for more than 20 years, and I will say higher ed keeps you young. So I have been working with AI tools since November of 2022 when ChatGPT first hit the scene. I've worked with developing resources for faculty, that's part of my role, helping folks figure out how to navigate this world. And I am kind of a skeptic, I will be honest, but I know a lot about this tool. So I would say that my use of AI tools kind of fall into 3 buckets right now. So the first bucket is I tend to use it for things that are less meaningful to me and the organization, but that I already know how to do. So the reason I do that is because if I already know how to do something, then I have already a good skill set to say what AI is generating is good or not, I need to make these tweaks or not. If I'm using it to do something I don't know how to do, how do I know that it's actually generating something that's good or useful? So one example there is the other day I wanted to look closely at a contract, and I was looking for something that came up over and over in the contract. I know how to do that. I can read a contract. Do I want to read a 200-page contract? No. So that is something I could put into our internal tool, Copilot, and ask some questions about what's in that contract. I could do that, and I can tell if it's right or wrong based on my knowledge. The second bucket is I use AI tools when I am not worried about skill loss. So one of the things we're learning with AI is that if we use it over and over and over again, it might weaken some of the skills that we're using AI to substitute. I do a lot of writing in my work. I love writing. That work is meaningful to me. So I tend not to use it so much for writing tasks because I'm worried about it weakening my writing skills. So I really think about the kinds of things that I can use it for that won't weaken a skill. So one example of that is we've been experimenting with these tools to translate handwritten text into OCR character recognition text for accessibility reasons. And I'm not worried about losing my ability to read handwriting. That's a skill I probably will have my whole life. So that's one example of what that looks like. And the third bucket is to develop my literacy. So I spend a lot of time poking around with these tools to see how they work or how they don't. I do a lot of something I think of as equity stress testing to see how's it working now? Has it improved? Has it not? So that's kind of the third way that I tend to experiment with these tools. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. So what skills should colleges be teaching today so students are prepared to use AI responsibly when they're working for folks here in the workplace?
Oh no, you got to hear from me again, sorry. So I think of kind of 4 things that I would like students to be thinking about that we should be teaching, and I think this might resonate with some of your work too, but you can tell me if not later. So one is just kind of the basics of what these tools are and how they work. Really understanding foundationally that these tools are predictive is essential to figuring out, is this a good fit for what I want to do or not? The second, and this speaks a little bit to kind of my own skepticism, is what their limitations are. Where does bias show up? What are some of the challenges with using these tools, and what do they do imperfectly? So those are kind of the standard skills, I think, that we're hearing across higher ed that folks really need to know and have in their back pocket when they're showing up in the workplace. The third is when to use these tools and when not to. And again, I keep thinking of the skills conversation. So using tools when you know how to do something and you can make it more efficient versus using them for something you don't know how to do. And when you're learning for the first time, whether you're in college, whether you're a lifelong learner, using the tools as a substitute for developing those skills might not serve you in the long run. And then the fourth piece that I think about often is the impact of AI usage, especially on your relationships. So we heard a little bit before about relationships, right? And how important relationships are in the work that we do. And so thinking about your clients, your customers, thinking about our students, what does it mean to think about using AI in relationship with folks? How would folks feel if they learn that you use AI for these tools? Maybe for these tasks. Maybe they'd be fine with it. Maybe it would bother them. You have to know a little bit about those folks that you serve and what your relationship with them is to decide what's the impact of this tool going to be. How is it going to affect that relationship? Does that make sense? Those of you who are head nodders, I so appreciate. I am a head nodder, so that helps me. That impact piece, I think, is a really crucial skill because you don't want to end up on the news in a bad way. You don't want to end up in a lawsuit. So those relationships pieces, I think, are really important to think about for our students and for all of us, really.
Thank you. I always like to look at the history of things first before I start looking at the future of things. So before looking at and starting to use AI, I always think about how did we do things before? So kind of speaking to you as well, or to some of your points. Do you remember card catalogs in the library? Remember the wonderful musty smell, the long, long catalogs and getting paper cuts from the note cards? I always think about how long did it take us to find a certain book when we looked at the card catalogs, or when we had to learn long division, right? That was a certain skill that we had to learn. And then came web searching, and then came the calculators, and then came ChatGPT. I mean, there was a few more things in there, right? We have to know how to do those things before we start to use these new tools. And so I think that's the other piece too that students need to understand, like how did we get to this new tool? And if we don't understand how we got there, because we don't understand the history, it's really hard to start using these new innovative things. When I first started using computers, I got to use the old Xerox machines that had like the centipede roller ball. Did anybody remember that? Okay, and the 13-inch floppies. Yes, I'm that old. And WordPerfect 3.1 with the reveal codes. Yeah, I'm getting some. Yeah, and so now when we look at Office 365, and it used to be 2021, 19, et cetera, those were the old tools. And so now we start looking at these new tools and new ways of using these tools, and then we start to embed these AI tools. We can appreciate AI, and I think that's why the students need to understand, before we start using these new tools, it's really important to understand what were the foundational pieces in order to start to appreciate these new things. And so as I look at my team, because they are sometimes they're students as well, when I start to look at my team, before we start to use these tools, they have to understand how do we get there first. Before we can start using, say, Cisco tools, we have to understand the code. Before we start using, Python or whatever, and I'm not a coder at all, but before we start looking at this, we have to understand DOS. We have to understand all the shell codes or whatnot. We have to understand these things before we can start looking at AI tools, because we have to be able to validate, right? I had someone on my team recently use a Copilot to do some, to want to update something on our domain controller. And it looked beautiful. And he presented it to me. And it's like, yeah, we should do this right away. And then I had somebody else on the team who said to me, this is absolutely wrong. And if I didn't know any better, and if the team didn't know any better, we would have really messed up our entire infrastructure, and no one would have been able to use any of the computers because we would have hosed our entire infrastructure. So AI is great, but if we don't know the history and if we don't know how to do things by scratch, AI is not a great tool. And so we have to be able to understand foundation before we can start using the advancements of these tools. So that's the one thing I would say that students really need to understand before they can start using AI.
I'm thinking of repeating a lot of what you've said, but another way that we talk about it in terms of curriculum is this idea of cognitive offloading, right? So I have older children and they drive, and I won't name her. She went to school in Woodbury, you might know her. She can't drive around without her phone up with the map happening, right? So like she will type in, I'm going from Woodbury High School to the library. I'm like, okay, that's about 3 blocks. You can handle that. But the point is that there are a lot of things that AI is so easy to use, and this is a challenge that we're seeing as teachers, that it's hard to get students to understand that in a real way because it is so easy. But what we're seeing as people come through is things like critical thinking and creativity are going to be really important, right? So I look a lot at what are job projections and what are the jobs that are going to exist. And the jobs that are going away tend to be the ones that have a lot of automation, room for automation. The jobs that are going to persist in areas like construction and education, these are things that require creativity and critical thinking and those types of skills. So we're working really hard to get students to practice those things and relationship building at a time when they're even more kind of isolated and into their devices. So it's a really big challenge and something I'm thinking about all the time.
If you were advising a small business or nonprofit leader, again, like some of our folks in the room, and you were just beginning to think about they were just beginning to think about AI, what's the first step you'd recommend? Yeah, please.
So my background is also in human resources. I would say the first step I would recommend is having an AI use policy. So a policy for your employees that outlines how they can and cannot use AI. So as we're doing our show of hands, I think there's a lot of organizations right now that are still trying to figure out how to navigate AI and what are the appropriate and productive ways to use it. But we know that people are figuring it out and using it a lot. And so for many employees, they're using AI to take shortcuts and get things done more quickly. And we know that there are a lot of risks and challenges that go along with uploading data around privacy, especially that protected information within your organization. So being clear with employees about what they can and cannot do with AI is really critical, I think, for protecting your organization.
I saw a show of hands. Personally, a lot of you are using AI. I think that's what I saw. I wear glasses, so. When you do a web search, how many of you search on the web? Just show of hands. Okay, that's AI. Just letting you know. So you're using it. Okay. So I would also say, I absolutely agree, you need in a business to have a policy, a use policy, and protect your data. By all means, protect your data. Don't upload things. Don't upload anything that you shouldn't be uploading, right? But it is also, if you use it the right way, it should not be a scary thing. I would also say too, there's a lot of product out there, a lot of applications that have AI already embedded. Those applications have a specific, those AI tools are built specifically for those applications. Those are trained in those, the AI is trained within those applications. So you can't necessarily uplift that AI bot or whatever it is and move it into a different tool because you will get different results that you're not expecting. Okay, so just know that when you're looking at a tool that you saw XYZ company was using and you want to put it in an ABC company, most likely it's not going to work in the way that you anticipate. So you do have to check for hallucinations or inaccurate results. So that would be the one thing I would say when you're thinking about looking at AI for your business or even personal use.
All right, so one of the things I find really important in my life, in the work that I do, is to bring a research mindedness to when I'm learning about something new. And what I mean by that in this context is you could do a little bit of research to find out what your peers are doing, what your competitors are doing with AI specifically, whether it's through conversation, whether it's through social media, get a sense of what folks are up to, would it work for you or not, and why? So those are the kinds of questions to ask as you're looking around, seeing what folks are up to, getting the lay of the land. Maybe you want to experiment with something that someone else is trying. Maybe you don't. Maybe that wouldn't work for you or that doesn't align with your values. And so as you're doing that, I think that could be a good foundation to a policy, developing a policy. Here's what I've seen, someone else do, and it seemed like that could be a really good fit for us. Let's try it out. Or here's what I've seen someone else do, and yikes, no thanks. So, and maybe that goes into our policy. So that kind of research mindedness, what are folks doing? Would that work for us, and why, or why not? I think those are good questions to kind of keep asking yourself as you're looking around and seeing what other folks are up to.
So as a part of our time here today, we were asked to possibly give a little demo or some guidance on how you develop an AI prompt. And so we're going to hand it over to our faculty member on the panel here, Mindy Travers.
Yeah, so I mentioned this, that we're trying to get students to focus on their critical thinking and their creativity, but we also know that going into the workplace, it's important for them to know how to use AI. So what I'm giving you is just a short version of a lesson from one of my classes where we talk to students about appropriate use and how to use it. So the first thing I would say is you can just kind of bring up a tool like ChatGPT or Gemini and use it very similar to like a Google search. But ideally, you're giving it what I'm going to call some context. Some people might think about this in terms of the training the tool, but we're going to think about what's the information that you want the tool to consider when helping you. So if we go to the next slide, what I mean by that is that AI tools, generative AI tools, they're not smart, but they're really, really fast, right? So if you just plug something in, it's going to give you something back. So the more that you can kind of direct it to give you meaningful information, the better. So in this example, we're thinking about it in the context of working in human resources. So hopefully you would already have some level of expertise in HR if you were going to use it in this way. But you might start by telling the tool what to do. So here the exact example is you act as an AI assistant for an HR manager of a private business. Your role is to provide clear, accurate, and practical guidance that is deeply rooted in US employment law. So you're telling it, this is the kind of information that I want from you. And you can also let it know what sort of tone you want it to have. So here we're saying maintain a professional, empathetic, and expert tone at all times, empowering users with reliable guidance and actionable advice. So before I get started in asking any questions, I might give ChatGPT this direction. And then for the next, so this slide, then we also, it can tap into any information, right? These large language models are gigantic, but maybe I want to know that I'm getting reliable information. So again, here I'm saying, please use the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission website as one of your primary sources. So I know as an HR person when we're thinking about law that EEOC site, for example, would have really reliable information, and that is where I want the primary source to be. So I might include that, right? And say, when a query can be answered using these materials, reference concepts, examples, so give me that. And then also include the hyperlink. So I might also, again, direct that ChatGPT tool to say, when referencing external resources, include the clickable hyperlink when appropriate. And then that means that when I get an answer, I can verify. So I can look at it and go, oh, does that seem right? It seems right. Is it really right? So that you get that sense of exactly where things are coming from. So we would give that context before we'd even ask it anything. All right, if we go over to the next slide. So then in terms of prompting, I like to talk to my students about different types of prompting. So one is called tree of thought. And you might be working with a tool that already knows what tree of thought prompting is. But the idea with tree of thought is you're really asking that tool to give you multiple possibilities. So one thing that a tool like ChatGPT likes to do is give you an answer and say, this is the one answer. And rarely is that the case. So here, you're kind of saying to it, can you give me 3 different options so that I could understand, like, what would be 3 different approaches and what are the benefits and challenges that go with each of it? So for example, if we were thinking about, I have an employee that's struggling and I want to do some coaching, or I'm going to need to write some sort of performance improvement plan, could you give me 3 different approaches to how I might handle this? And then again, I can draw from my own expertise as a marketing person or an HR person to say, which one of those really does sound like it's the best? So in that type of prompting, that's really what we're doing, is saying, give me these 3 different branches or a number of different branches, and identify what is the thought process that goes with each of it, so that when you're provided with a solution from the tool, you have that ability to tap into your own expertise and say which one really aligns with our company's values, or kind of my own expertise and what I think is correct. So that tree of thought prompting is one way to make sure you're not just kind of getting one answer, it looks good, and going with it. And then, so this is, I've given an example exactly what that would look like. So what I would type in is not just like, what do I do with performance improvement plans? You would say, please create an improvement plan using the tree of thought approach. And maybe I have had to tell it exactly what that is. And the main objective is to improve employee performance. So I'm not saying I want to get this person fired. I want the tool to know what I'm trying to do with it, and what are 3 approaches that could be used to write a performance improvement plan. Explore each solution, including possible advantages and disadvantages of each approach. So then when I'm getting this, I might get a performance improvement plan that looks really good, and something that would have taken me maybe 8 hours to write, it might just show up instantaneously, right? So it can be helpful. I would not advise you to do this kind of thing if you have no expertise in HR and you've never seen a performance improvement plan before, right? So again, this holds true if you're thinking about marketing issues or accounting or whatever it might be. The next slide talks about a different approach, which is called chain of thought prompting. And this is where, instead of looking at multiple options, we're going to go really deep into kind of one idea. So again, it's a technique that you can use where you're kind of giving a logical sequence of steps and telling the tool exactly what you want it to do. So this involves that idea of breaking down kind of a more complex task into these smaller, manageable parts. And what it allows you to see is like, how is the tool thinking about this answer? And again, we come back to the idea of needing to assess it. Is it a good answer? Is it something that I should go with? So if you go to the next one, I've given an example of kind of what this might look like. So here, again, we're still thinking about creating a performance improvement plan for somebody, but we've laid out 9 very specific steps. So I'm saying to the tool, define employee improvement plans, so I know that we have the same idea of what this is that I'm asking for. Explain why an employer would use a performance improvement plan, identify the main reasons an employee might be given a performance improvement plan, provide some examples of a PIP, and then describe the major laws that need to be considered when I'm developing this PIP, discuss the ways a PIP can be discussed with an employee, explore potential benefits of each approach, provide a script that can be followed when delivering a PIP to an employee, and summarize the key points discussed in this chat. So then when I'm getting, again, all of that back from it, I can kind of see what are all the things that I'm going to need to know about to evaluate whether or not this performance improvement plan that I get at the end of it is worthwhile. And there are some things in HR, like writing job descriptions, and you mentioned contracts, those things that take a lot of time, where this can be really helpful and more efficient. But you don't want to get this stuff wrong either. You'll be in a lot of trouble. So that's one example of kind of what we're talking about in some of our courses, and I thought it might be helpful since we got that request. So.
Thank you. So with that, we wanted to open it up for questions. Oh.
So one question we get, is how accurate is the response when you're doing research, just the general searches? How accurate is that data? I realize it depends on where it's coming from and what you're researching. Do you have any statistics to tell us more about that?
Boy, I wish I could say, yes, I can tell you it is 63.7% accurate. I think the reason why that I so appreciate, first of all, full disclosure, you asked this question before the panel, and so I've had some time to think about it. We were chatting about it a little bit in advance. And I'm going to say the most annoying academic thing ever, which is it depends. But the way that it depends kind of matters. So it matters the tool you're using, what kind of information is in the training data for the tool, and whether the question you're asking it to address is likely to be represented in that training data. So if you are asking it a question, so when I think about kind of in a higher ed context, most kind of tools like ChatGPT probably have a pretty good understanding of like a biology 101 course and what's in a course. When you get to more advanced courses, the literacy of those tools might go down quite a bit. And so thinking about whether what you're asking is likely to be well documented in the data the tool has access to is really critical for answering that question. If you're asking really specialized questions that are very particular to your context, unless you've given these tools a lot of information about your context, which can up the accuracy rate, depending on the guardrails you set up, it might not be very accurate at all. So rather than a percent, what I would say is it depends on the kind of question you're asking and whether what you're asking is likely to show up in the tool itself. Does that make sense? Okay, again, the head nodders, bless you. Yeah.
There is an NPR, when ChatGPT first came out, hit the news and all that, there was something that NPR had about 3 hospitals that were training language models. And when they were trained on these specific hospitals, the end results were good, right? And then they moved these language models to the different hospitals, and then the results were bad, relatively bad. So again, it really depends on how they're being trained. I would also say too, based upon what model they were using, for example, I wanted to take something that was being translated from English to Vietnamese and English to French because I've got family in Vietnam and France. According to book language, right, the translation was perfect. But then when I gave this Vietnamese and French translation to a native Vietnamese and French speaker, they're like, oh, these are probably not the right way to say it. Right? So again, it was grammatically correct, but not necessarily how a native Vietnamese or French speaker would say it. So again, you get some good stuff, but it kind of depends on how people are going to use the words.
Yeah, and students struggle with this a lot because very often I can tell when they've used AI and it isn't accurate, right? But that's where I go back to kind of that idea of how you're prompting and how you're using it too. So if students have known to use EOC website as their source, they're probably getting reliable information. If it's more just like a general search tool they're using it, we don't really know where they're drawing the information from.
Yeah, and I think brown shirt first. Yes, give it to the retiree, the man of the hour.
Being so infant as it is it getting smarter? So is that becoming...
According to the movies, yes.
Watching on movies.
I was going to say, according to movies, yes. iRobot, what else was it? iRobot, Skynet, Her, Megan.
Skynet.
Yes.
Go back to Terminator.
Oh, Terminator, right. Which one? I mean, I think it is as it becomes more mature, right? We've started out with ChatGPT 2.0, now I think we're up to 5.0. With St. Paul College and Min State, we're using Copilot, and so we're training it based upon what we're putting in there. So, and we can train it because, like my example before, where one of my staff members was putting in information that was and the end results were bad, we were able to say, no, you were actually incorrect, and then Copilot was like, oh, you're right, we are wrong. Yeah. So they can be trained, and it is getting a little bit smarter. But again, it's not going to take the place of humans.
Again, I just have the most annoying things to say. I apologize in advance. It depends on what you mean by smarter. So, we use the term artificial intelligence. What does that really mean? Does it mean it does things faster than us? Is that what being intelligent means? Does it have access to more information? Is that what being smart means? And so it's worth thinking a little bit, I think, reflecting a bit about, again, what functions we want these tools to serve. One thing I'll say in terms of large language models like ChatGPT and other chat tools, they're kind of bumping up against the limit of their programming right now. And until there is some major innovation in the way those tools are structured, Structured, what I'm hearing in the research and what I'm seeing kind of on the ground is there's a little bit of an upper limit to what they can do right now. Maybe that'll change. Maybe we'll get to artificial general intelligence. I don't know when. We're not there yet. So I would say if you were like, oh no, the world is ending, don't panic. We're not there yet. But if you want to talk about the social media site that's been created for AI agents, we can chat about that later. That's kind of an interesting new innovation. But yeah, it really depends on what we mean by smart. That's, again, one of those annoying things. Yeah.
I also want to remind everybody that this was built by humans. So don't forget about that. So this was built by human people. Humans will always be smarter, I believe.
That was a good pause.
So I got two quick questions. When it comes to the prompting, can you, like, if you have a subscription to ChatGPT, can you make those prompts on how you want things to be done once, and then every time you go in, it will remember that, or do you have to do it every time you're doing a search? And then my second question is, how do we keep the kids literate these days? So how do you at the college, like you talk about, catching them if they're cheating, if they're using it, that kind of stuff, because I'm seeing this, it was already bad enough with the phones and with all the stuff that was going on before this. Now it's getting crazy. So how do you keep the kids engaged with staying with the skills that they really need?
That's a good question.
That's a good question.
Well, first, to your first question about the prompting, yes. So, I could set this up and say, I always want you to serve as like this little HR assistant to me, and these are the sources I want you to use, and then it remembers that. So when I'm coming back to it, we interact in the same way. Yep. And I don't have an answer to the second question. This is something we're just thinking about all the time. But I will say there are a lot of students that they're kind of resisting AI in a sense. Like they want more face-to-face interaction. They do want to be learning. I think what is hard is right now, it's really demanding to be a student. And a lot of our students have families and full-time jobs, and if you have 2 hours to study and you really need 17, it's really hard not to take the shortcut that is AI. But we're always looking for ways to say, how do we rethink the way that people learn? It might mean going back to some practices and assignments that I thought we'd never go back to, moving away from things like papers and saying you need to stand up and give an impromptu speech, because I just want to hear from you, and is this your thought process? And so we're shifting, I think, all those practices that we learn, but we have not solved it, and it continues, I think, to be a real issue, especially as we've seen a spike in the demand in like online learning. I think that is the area where it gets the most challenging.
What about the kids in high school now too? Because you guys are with adults, right? Mostly you're teaching adults.
Yep, a lot of PSEO.
High school students too, as PSEO students.
Because I can see where adults might be, they're kids, they got families, got all that, but have a little bit different approaches than kids, younger kids.
And you have your digital natives, right? Who grew up with technology, so they might embrace it too. But yeah.
I think the best approach with students right now is to show curiosity and have a conversation. I think what we know doesn't work super well, at least this is my observation and other folks can disagree, is to show up in a classroom and say, you can't use AI, good luck. To show some curiosity for if students are resistant or not, if they're excited, why? What's their experience? What do we know about these tools right now? How do you want to use these tools in this class? Maybe we'll experiment with it in a couple of ways, in a structured and kind of educational context. So to me, I think, and maybe this is just the sociologist in me speaking, to engage in conversation and to approach these conversations with curiosity rather than judgment, which I think is difficult for many of us, because I don't know if y'all feel the same, I'm tired. I'm tired and I'm grumpy. So how to approach conversations with students, with our kids, from a lens of, wow, that's really interesting, tell me more about that. Or, oh, where did you hear about kind of that, limitation of AI? Let's talk about that. Or let's decide collectively how we want to engage with these tools in our classes and why. So I think that's a better approach for kind of developing that conversation in an ongoing way, rather than do this, do that, yes, no. Nothing is a binary. So that's what I would say.
Sarah,
John, and then John, and then some more.
All right, thank you.
Tabs back here.
I represent an organization that brings a message of awareness and education in the public schools about sexual exploitation and bullying. We need help in our curriculum how to address the issue that is bringing great harm to our kids. Where do we get help, and what can you offer today?
Yeah. So just for clarification, so do you mean the use of AI deepfakes, for example, and the way that AI tools are being used, to represent images of young folks? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it is an emerging area. I think there's a lot of litigation going on. I think, again, with that kind of research mindedness, to look at your peers, to look at major national organizations. How are they tackling this issue right now? How are they helping with that literacy? What policies are schools having in place for this kind of thing? Are schools even aware that this is happening? Probably yes at this point. I think that's how I would think about it, is that research mindedness, what's out there in terms of tools, and then that policy question, the awareness question. There are a lot of layers to it that make that work really difficult right now.
That's a really great question, and I'm wondering, with the school districts, especially the districts that are providing, iPads and Chromebooks, what they're using, because they have the, I don't know why it's escaping me right now, but with E-rate funding and whatnot, they have to abide by the SIPA rules, right, the Children's Internet Protection Act. And a lot of districts, I believe, are using something like GoGuardian or Securely, and I'm wondering if there's any movement from those companies to be able to provide any type of guidance or support with catching that type of cyberbullying or any type of the deep fakes or whatnot that are happening. I'm a few years removed from those types of conversations since I'm no longer in the K-12 space, but I'm really curious if any of those types of companies have moved the needle when it comes to that, because the whole reason why companies like GoGuardian or Securely, no, I'm not being paid by them to mention their names, but I'm wondering if they have embraced any changes within the AI landscape to address cyberbullying and whatnot. So I'd be curious if you're able to have those types of conversations.
I don't need a microphone. Thank you. Question: AI platforms, whether it's ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, whatever else, are there certain niches or certain industries where one is better than the other? Restaurants, retail, trades, education, stuff like that.
There are, depending on which application you're using, right? Because some of them are application-based. So like Adobe has Adobe AI, right? So that is AI built for that environment. And so you're going to see a lot of graphic designers, marketing and whatnot who are going to use that. In the science and research, I think it's called Scribe AI. So it's pulling directly from research papers. When I was in school, I was using Perplexity, and so that the beauty about Perplexity, and this was before Gemini and all that was doing this, they were actually providing the research papers or the links to the articles. And before, ChatGPT was not doing that, and so a lot of students were moving in that direction. So I think it really depends on what application or what purpose. I don't know necessarily about like the restaurant business or whatnot, but I would definitely look into whatever space you're in, because there's probably applications that have AI built specifically for that purpose. And so, as I was mentioning earlier, you can't necessarily take an AI that was built for a specific purpose and move it into a different purpose, because it's not trained in that space. And so, if you're trying to use a restaurant AI but taking a Scribe AI that was on research papers, restaurant business and research papers, I don't know, there may be a connection or most likely not, right? Unless you're talking about nutrition and health. So yes, there's probably things that are built better for those spaces. And again, you'll just have to talk to your peers, kind of what Claire was saying earlier too. You're welcome. unless Claire, you want to, would you like
I mean,
to say
I
more?
always have something to say, but no, I'm good. I'm good.
May I just color in a little bit on the education piece to John Larson's question, former educator here. The statewide, students are not allowed to use technology, whether that's happening or not. We could have another conversation about that. I think to your point, John, it's also happening up in their bedrooms. It's happening on the school bus. So technology is just everywhere, and it's how do we get around it, right? So I can say that school districts definitely have put the kibosh on using technology in the classrooms. So that's one thing. The other thing I was going to mention to your point about trades and technology and different things, I had the opportunity last summer to help with an educator externship over in Minneapolis. So I was with a group of middle and high school educators, and they went to places like, we went to Medtronic, we went to St. Catherine's, we went to US Bank corporate headquarters. The idea was that teachers should learn what industry is looking for when they're growing these students and graduating these students off. What skills do they need to have? Without exception, these large organizations said, well, they better come prepared to use large language models, even if like Medtronic has their own, right? Very proprietary. They better come prepared to use it. And of course, I wish Vicki was here. The teachers were horrified because they're doing everything they can. Some of them are doing everything they can to keep it out of their classroom. So I, as an educator now working in business, thought, oh my gosh, this river is vast and wide. We're in the same canoe paddling in exact opposite directions. So I don't have an answer for that, but I wonder if you can speak to that, because at the college level, you're a little bit closer then to those folks working. But I just saw the great divide as recently as last summer, where industry said, you better, and high school's like, we're not. So.
Yeah, I can say I think in a general way, higher ed has gotten that message pretty loud and clear. And institution-wide, there is an expectation that students do need to develop these skills. I think where the rubber meets the road really is in the classroom. And I think what helps students is a diversity of approaches to AI in the classroom. So it helps them develop not just a basic understanding of AI, but what AI usage might look like in this context versus that context, and also including maybe some classes that don't have any AI in them. I think really it's that kind of class level of engagement with these tools that's going to be the most powerful for folks. And there's a variety of levels of interest and skill across faculty and those of us who work in leadership and administration too. So I think actually a strength of what we do is that diversity of approaches. And I think that's really what students will benefit the most from, not sort of a single approach to it. So my sense is that higher ed kind of as an industry has gotten that message loud and clear. And what it looks like really varies. And I think that's actually a strength. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So I oversee our human resources program. We have a 2-year associate degree. Kind of our approach, and that has been students take a lot of HR classes, and then at the end they have an HR capstone. So in the HR capstone, once our students have had an opportunity to develop their HR expertise, in that capstone is when we're saying, okay, let's try using some of these tools. And so if they're presenting you with a job description or with a performance improvement plan, as a class, let's evaluate the kind of content we're getting. How is it useful? So that's how we've done it in that specific program, is to teach people how to use it more towards the end of their program. Not that it always works that way, but that's been an approach.
This may be a dumb question, but if AI doesn't know the answer, is it trained to say, I don't know? Or is it trained to give you the best guess that may not be true?
That's a great question.
So yes, it will say something in response. I think there have been some attempts by some companies to say, we won't respond to these kinds of questions. Yes. So if you ask it questions that it perceives to be biased in some way, it might say, I'm sorry, I don't answer those kinds of questions. And there are some challenges with that. But yeah, I don't want to give too much personality to these tools because they're not human, but their goal is to please you and to give you something that sounds plausible. So even if you ask them, hey, is this correct? Or, oh, you got it wrong. It will say, oh, I'm so sorry, you're right. So there is no guarantee that, so it won't say, I don't know, unless it's been built, hard-coded into its programming, kind of.
Yeah, I wrote something recently, and it did provide me a response saying that it could not provide me something, could not provide me feedback because it was not able to, because of the content. But there was also, I believe, a case where a person had killed themselves because of a conversation that it had with an AI. I think it was ChatGPT. So it unfortunately will always have a response. So obviously to someone's detriment.
I was going to share a funny story, which is my husband really loves soccer, and he does like these like fantasy football kind of pick your favorite players, and so he had asked ChatGPT basically help me pick my players because he wants to win this league, and it kept saying, yes, I'm working on that spreadsheet. And I was like, Nate, I don't think it's going to happen. And it went on for about 3 days where it kept saying, I just need more time. I'm still working on this. I just need a little more time. And then he got a little salty with it and finally just said, like, can you or can you not do this? But it took 3 days of prompting where it kept saying, I need more time. I'm going to figure this out for you. So it will lie to you. I'm just going to, there is a...
You never got a list?
No, because it can't do it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so anyway.
So you can stump it with spell check, though. My spelling is so bad it doesn't work.
That's the test.
No idea.
That's where it's really smart, but also not.
Yeah.
Molly and then back.
So there's a couple of questions. So I work in marketing and I use Chat GPT to respond to reviews, many different levels, but in the evening I watch things like, the internet made all these millionaires, right? And Chat GPT, AI is going to make billionaires. How? And how do we do this?
I'm hearing, if I knew the answer to that, I would not be sitting here on this panel. Is what the body language is telling me.
I got an answer to that. I mean, okay. Yeah, if I knew the answer to that, I appreciate being here with y'all, but I might not be here with y'all. I think some of it requires your tolerance for doing shady stuff. So, I think
I'm definitely in.
I can't help you with that. But things like intellectual property, the environmental impact. So depending on your tolerance for those kinds of things, I think that is part of it. Yeah, sorry, I don't think any of us have an answer to that. Like, how do we become billionaires with AI? Unless you identify a problem that AI can solve and do well.
And I want to say I want to say software or classes is this cursive, and it's like, you're going to be the smartest in 20 days. And then I go and I AI chat that, or, and they're like, no, this is not even a good course. You can't get your money back. People are always teaching. And I feel like that is probably where there's a lot of self-made millionaires. Like, I will teach you how to sell 10 homes in one day. I better go to that class. It's only $300. And you've got how many people across the world doing so. I just didn't know if you had like some kind of success stories, or, I know kids can build a website in a day, or not even 5 minutes. Like, anything kind of business fun?
I never have any fun, so I don't really know. I don't know. Maybe other folks have ideas. I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think the thing that comes to mind for me is there's some case studies that we look at in our coursework, and where a lot of people are trying to find efficiency is with eliminating jobs and replacing them with AI support. And in some of those cases, what we're seeing is that in the short run, you might save money, right? Like, I could say, do I really need a marketing assistant? When instead I could just feed information into ChatGPT and have it answer. And what ends up happening is when you erode the expertise that exists in your business, very often that's hard to sustain. So in the short run, there's some organizations that have made a lot of money kind of doing that. So maybe where you would have needed, let's say, 40 employees, you have 2 or 3 people running. Yeah, and then in the end, it doesn't work out too well. At least that has been some of the cases that we've looked at in our classes where we're thinking about it. But you probably, could attempt something like that, yeah.
Well, I think a lot of that wealth is coming from the stock market. you bought Apple and bought that when you first came out, yeah, it became a millionaire. A lot of it's, right, AI stock.
They said there's 3 big players. It's
I think you should like.
OpenAI, NVIDIA, and
All right, last few questions here.
I have a question. How are you guiding your students as they are entering the job market or searching for jobs with regards to the technology and resumes and trying to get an interview? And I'm hearing students telling me they're getting interviewed by AI and they want to make more of a personal impact. So how are you addressing that with your students?
Well, that's an interesting question because I think on the one hand, we can use tools like AI to help create the most polished resume you've ever seen, right? And so it's important to know how to use it. But I think what we're leaning into is networking and relationship building, right? So it's important you have your LinkedIn profile, but being a part of a group like this, I think is more critical than ever, and especially for students who have maybe experienced COVID through high school and they are really into their device, and just talking to people and meeting new people is a skill that's harder than it's ever been. I think those are some of the things that we're practicing and being really thoughtful about in the classroom, and how do we build those things into our program and offer more supports around things like networking, because it's always been hard, like to come into this room and not know anybody and just kind of put yourself out there. That's a skill in of itself, but I think those are things that we're working on. And at the college too, to think about how are we providing more support for some of that stuff. So it's a little counterintuitive, right? We need to know the technology, but the technology is kind of putting an emphasis on relationship building and communication skills like never before.
Mindy, can I ask a follow-up question to that? So, given workforce stuff, is it appropriate for a candidate to call, let's say, an organization, Anderson Windows, Regents Hospital, whatever, and just ask the general question, do you vet candidates' resumes using AI or not? Is that an appropriate question to ask?
I mean, I think they could, but I would say from my HR perspective, you should just assume that they are, right? Like, so in hiring and recruiting, and I think if I had the exact data, I hate citing data, that's not how my brain works, but it's something close to like 90% of employers now are using those kind of
Regents does not, Regents Hospital does not, and I was shocked to find out. I thought, well, I wonder if it's a question, if you've got these young adults that are looking for jobs, or anybody looking for jobs, and you could say, lie and say, my name is Bill, for instance. And are you using AI to vet your candidates' resumes? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing to reflect on, right? And so as a faculty member, what I'm trying to get them to have is the skill set to do both, right? So that they've got a resume that is scannable, that would kind of make it through some of that vetting, but then also know if they're not using those kind of tools, what does that mean for how they present themselves too? But I like that. That's a good idea.
And I would say that AI does help get through some pieces of it because you have to be able to meet the minimum qualifications. So for St. Paul College, when we post positions, applicants have to meet minimum qualifications before they can get potential interview, right? So AI can help with that vetting process. And so to your point, if there is I believe it's called ATS, applicant tracking system. So that will help people get through that first part. And I would say there's probably a bigger reliance or a heavier reliance on ATS for entry-level positions than there are for the higher level positions, I would believe. Now I know that we don't use ATS for our applications either. But then I would also say too, just because you meet minimum qualifications doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to do a really great interview. So you do need to have the skills. You have to be truthful, right? You have to have the skills, but you also have to have the personality and be able to answer the questions effectively when you actually get the interview. So AI is great in some ways, but you also have to be able to be a human and do the interview.
Although you could use AI to help you practice interviewing.
You could.
That's all.
Well, I have a question about like protecting our youth, especially our young women, with TikTok, right? So all the beauty videos and all of the other videos that are out there, and the AI taking their putting it out there. So, I mean, is there any advice on protecting our young women, our, you know, our children, maybe not high school age, but, you know, post-high school, pre-college, you know, they're doing their tutorials. I mean, should we be reaching out to TikTok, to, you know, those platforms to help get them down once their image has been stolen, type of thing? And I think that's really it's a huge thing right now, especially among young women, specifically.
I don't know if anyone has that subject matter expertise, but definitely we always have thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, there are legislative routes to change potentially. You know, I don't know how responsive corporations are likely to be to concerns. I personally, my opinion is I'm not super confident that that is an especially effective path. But I think in relationship with young folks, the scholarship that I've seen really talks about the importance of, you know, helping parents understand how to navigate those conversations, how to have that ongoing, like we were saying, ongoing conversation with kids about, hey, how are you using social media? What's going on there? I mean, some of you who have older kids might be better suited to speak to that question, but the scholarship really suggests that, you know, parents' knowledge of what their kids are up to, you know, thinking about when the right time to introduce social media is in a kid's life, and really building those literacy skills with knowing what happens with your imagery. And then maybe the legal system. I mean, I don't always have a lot of hope about those processes, but it is a tool. So that's what I know. But yeah, I'm not an expert in this.
Kind of to speak to your point about becoming the quick billionaire and millionaire, it's all about the likes, right? So if we weren't trying to be the quick millionaire billionaire, we wouldn't be posting our makeup videos, our quick 30-second dance videos, our show us our butt videos, because that's really what they are, right? And I have you know, she's now 21 and I have a 23-year-old, so boy, and so it is all about the likes. It's about, you know, at what point do we start making money off of the pictures that we post? And whether or not they are meant to be sexy videos or just like, hey, look at my new makeup tutorial video. They're posting videos to just, you know, how many thumbs up, how many hearts are we getting? And so if we stop putting the emphasis on how many likes we get and stop making it a competition with our friends, then we reduce the risk. Granted, we need to maybe help people understand, help our young children understand that there are risks, because, you know, there's always going to be, you know, there's always that internet bravado. There's always going to be I'm looking at you, my friend, in the brown and the blue shirt. You know, you're always going to have the cyber bullies who are going to take that video. You're always going to have the deep fakes, because now you can do it with your voice. Now you can do it with your image. They're always going to have that. But the only way that they get it is if you post it. And I can tell you, there was this when I was in high school. Now this was back in the 80s. I was in high school. I was super stupid. I was sitting in an airplane with somebody who was sitting next to me, and I happened to say my name was Sonia. I go to Claremont High School, and this person came to find me. Now my last name is Zucker, Z. Somehow he made it into the admissions office, found the yearbook, found me, went to my classroom. So this was back when there was no social media. And this person creeped on me. So where there's a will, there's a way. So now it's just easier to have that way.
Sarah, we're going to do 2 more questions.
2 more questions. All right.
I got another one.
Okay.
How do parents get educated on how to deal with the kids, especially in the younger years? Because I'm a firm believer that a lot of challenges in life for kids start at home. And I think parents need to take responsibility as they're raising their kids on what's right, what's wrong, and, you know, whatever it is. Any suggestions on where parents can go to get information on how to handle this?
AI 101.
Go chat GPT.
Yeah.
Aren't there parent, school school
There might be
community?
school-based resources, but there are national organizations too that have some basic literacy information. I think Common Sense Media is one that comes to mind that folks might have heard of. I'm not sure how much they're doing specifically with AI and AI-generated content, but I'm sure there are national organizations with, educational tools. I think, the challenge is that parents are coming from so many different contexts with different levels of literacy and time to engage with their kids. So how you address parents as a whole in a way that allows them to access those things, that I don't know. I will just say for myself personally, I have an 8-year-old, and we are pretty strict about what our kid has access to right now and will have access to until they're like, 30. But we explain to our kid why, right? They don't use YouTube. They have no access to YouTube Kids, and, I'll be very transparent with them about why. And that why piece is really essential, that parents understand the why and not just, it's kind of like, college-age kids too, the why of it. It's not just that I'm mean. Yeah, that's not gonna fly. That's not gonna fly with my kids specifically, bless them. But, to have enough literacy to be able to say the why, that is the trick. And then have a relationship with your kid, that ongoing relationship to be able to say, this is what I'm setting up for you, and this is not, and this is why. There's no one size fits all for that, for a whole bunch of reasons, but that's how I think of it.
And this is not meant to be disrespectful to any parent, but parents need to be okay with being parents. And I think with this generation, and I look at my kids too, they want to be friends. Parents want to be friends with their kids. And so at what point are we going to be parents to our kids? The way I was raised, the way that I raised my kids as a single parent, we had to lay down the rules. And so they didn't get I made the mistake because I was a single parent of, providing a phone to my son, and then learned that he was looking up videos for a friend of his, and they were not good videos. And so I learned pretty quickly that while I thought I was being the responsible parent, that doesn't necessarily mean that my children weren't being peer pressured into doing stupid things on the phone too. So, I think that we have to have those conversations, and it's really okay for parents to say no. And I think that's the other thing too, is that as I always told my children that I'm going to be your parent, I'm not your friend, I'm your mom. And I think that's the other maybe fundamental thing that our parents need to know now as they're raising children, especially in this really scary time of the internet.
Last question. Do we have a last question? Oh, yes. All right.
Thank you. We were talking a little bit about workforce and how AI reviews resumes and applications. And I just wanted to flip that for a second. And I do work primarily with older adults. And some of our older adults are semi-retired or looking for that last 10-year job, or going back into the workforce, thinking they were retired, but now they're not. But where can the community access resources for understanding how AI is used in the hiring practice for older adults who maybe don't have as much familiarity with that affecting their practices?
I think it's a good opportunity for chambers like this one and others to pull together resident experts and have those conversations, set up panels, even set up a single person to come to Community Thread and talk through what some of that is. I'm not kidding when I say I get pinged every single week about how we are going to get this information out, and everybody needs something different. So I would say in closing here, that we should probably put out an exit survey that basically says, what did you learn today? What are we missing? What more needs to come? He's with Anderson, so that's manufacturing. Like, what lanes, what part of workforce do we need to tap into? That'd be a good place to say that we can aggregate that information. But with it changing on the dime, we could run this quarterly. And I think we would all learn something. So good question, and you and I can connect.
Yeah, that'd be great, right? Yeah.
And I think although AI is new, sort of introduction of technology to folks that are unfamiliar with it and are thinking like, I don't need to know that, but maybe they do. I'll answer this question that, 20 years ago at our college, we were one of the first institutions in the community college network to go online and require applicants to apply through our online portal. Like we said, we are no longer accepting paper, it's a matter of efficiency. But what we did as a part of that is we modified our admissions office and had 20 computers installed. And so if someone needed help, we said, you can't do it by yourself, you don't have a computer, come on in. And we would handhold them through the process. And sometimes it was like, it's asking for your first name, type it in, let's find the letters. And so I think that to a certain degree with anything where you have folks that are really new to a concept and trying to learn, offering hands-on support sessions to help them navigate it is a really important element.
Public library too.
Public library, yeah. Anyone else wanted to answer that question? All right. Thank you very much for having us today. Thank you for your questions.